Hi everyone and welcome back to Macbeth Explained Annotate With Me series. In today's video we're going to be looking at Act 2, Scene 2. Now this is a really important scene in the play. It is the point of no return. So this scene indicates the point at which Macbeth and Lady Macbeth can't come back from what they've done. This scene is right after the murder of King Duncan. Like I said in the last video, we are never really going to see King Duncan's death on stage as far as the actual play is concerned. We just see the moment right before it and right after it, and this moment gives us a lot of information about the characters, then their reactions to the murder, and a lot of information about just the characters themselves, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. So as usual, if you'd like to pause the video, go grab your copy of the text, pens, highlighters, anything you need, and press play when you're ready. Scene 2, the same. So here the same refers to the setting of scene 1, which was a court in Macbeth's castle. Enter Lady Macbeth. Now this scene, the language is mostly pretty straightforward, I would say. I'll try to explain any terms that we might not have come across before, but if you're now sort of getting used to the hath being replaced by has and things like that, you'll find that the language is starting to get a little bit more straightforward. However, this scene is rich with key quotes that you would definitely want to use in an essay about Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. And this scene touches on a lot of the key themes such as guilt, murder, betrayal, madness, etc. So Lady Macbeth says, so she's on her own here, presumably in a court in the castle, sort of waiting for Macbeth to come back from the murder. She says, that which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. What hath quenched them hath given me fire. So when she's talking about them, she's talking about the guards. The alcohol she gave the guards made them drunk, but she had some of it and it made her feel braver. Okay, what has quenched them has given me fire. She had a bit of so she used alcohol to sort of ply the guards and get them drunk. But she had a little bit of it, but it's made her feel like more motivated. She's got fire in her now. She feels bolder. She feels more courageous. She says, hark, peace. Hark means listen or hear. It's an archaic term. This indicates that she's heard something. And then she says, it was the owl that shrieked, the fatal bellman which gives the sternest good night. So she heard a sound and it startled her. She said, hark, what's this? What sound is this? But then she realized it was just an owl shrieking, and she describes the owl as being a fatal bellman. Of course, a bellman is the person that rings a bell. She's saying that the owl's shriek announces the sort of final good night of Duncan. So she's associating the owl's shriek with Duncan's death. Of course, she is the fatal bellman because she's the one that rang the bell that indicated that it was time for Macbeth to kill Duncan. I won't really touch on this. It's not that important of a quotation, but it does touch on the sort of recurring motif of birds. There's a lot of talk of ravens, owls, birds, things like that throughout Macbeth. She says he is about it. So here she's talking about Macbeth committing the murder. Again, sort of tiptoeing around the word murder. They don't really talk about, they never sort of name it directly. He is about it. He's doing it. The doors are open, and the surfeited grooms do mock their charge with snores. So she's talking about the guards being asleep, and it's almost as if they're mocking the king by being asleep. So the surfeited grooms is the drunk guards. She says, I have drugged their possets, that death and nature do contend about them, whether they live or die. She's saying she's gotten them so drunk that they're passed out, and it's hard to tell whether they're asleep or dead. So then, within. So within means it's happening off stage. It might be happening if the stage has several levels. It might be happening, Macbeth might be on a different level of the stage. Macbeth might be sort of off stage. So from within, who's there? What? Ho? We know that Macbeth is close by and he's heard someone and he's asking who it is. Then Lady Macbeth hears something, but at this point in the text, Lady Macbeth can't see Macbeth. So we'll make a quick note of it just so you can understand this bit a little bit better. Here, Lady Macbeth can hear Macbeth, but she can't see him, as he wouldn't be on stage with her or on the same part of stage with her. So she hears something and she says, alack. Alack is archaic. It's an archaic form of alas. And alas is an expression of like regret. Like, alas, that this should happen. Alas, something bad happened in the end. Alas, I am afraid they have awaked, and 'tis not done. So here she speaks her fear out loud, that the gods will have awoken before Macbeth has finished killing Duncan. The attempt and not the deed confounds us. She's saying we might fail from just trying to murder Duncan and not actually doing it, right? Because if the guards wake up in the middle of Macbeth trying to murder Duncan, that's going to be a big problem for them. So she's sort of scared of getting caught, essentially. Hark, so again this word, listen. I laid the daggers ready. He could not miss them. She's sort of like, almost like talking loud to herself, like comforting herself, like, what if, what if the guards woke up and Macbeth didn't do it? What if we get caught and that's what's going to be, our failure and we're going to get punished because of that? And she said, no, I put the daggers down. He couldn't have missed them. He must have seen the daggers. And then she says something really interesting, and this is definitely a key quote that you want to make a note of. She says, had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. So here we find out that Lady Macbeth did go over to, after she got the guards strong, she went over to Duncan's room to lay down the daggers, ready for Macbeth to kill Duncan. Which is interesting because Macbeth actually carries a dagger in the previous scene, so I wonder how many daggers he used, but presumably she didn't want him to use his dagger so that they could plant these specific daggers on the guards. And she says, had he not looked like my father as he slept, I would have done it. She's saying that if Duncan hadn't looked like her father while he was asleep, she would have killed him herself. And this is a really interesting insight into Lady Macbeth's character, because so far we've seen her with other characters. We've seen her with Macbeth being very commanding, very cold-hearted, very firm, very strong. We've seen her with Duncan and her guests being very welcoming, very kind. But here she's completely on her own. She doesn't think there's anyone else on stage with her. And she reveals something about her personality that she tends to really hide from the other characters, which is her softer side. The side of her which presumably she sees as a weakness. The fact that she didn't kill Duncan herself because he looked like her dad, because he looked like her father. That sort of strange attachment, seeing Duncan almost like a father figure, made it harder for her to commit the murder herself. So that's really interesting. Whether she means this or not, whether she's lying or making excuses, of course, is completely up to your interpretation. You might not see a softness in her through that quotation. You might think, no, she's just saying that because she didn't want to go through with the murder herself, and your interpretation would be perfectly valid. But of course, if you're analysing this quote, you want to sort of really pick out all the different things it could show us about Lady Macbeth, because that's what high-level analysis is. That's how you get high marks for AO2. So here, Lady Macbeth is revealing that Duncan looked like her father when he slept, and that's why she couldn't. Yeah, this could be another aspect of her manipulation. This could just be fear. She's not actually as brave as she thinks, or this could just be a sort of more tender, loving side to her. I would definitely explore these different interpretations, but this is a really good quote for Lady Macbeth, especially because students will tend to focus on the sort of obvious points about Lady Macbeth, about her being evil and manipulative, all the things that are very sort of easy to pick out. But being able to find the nuances, to sort of, in Macbeth, there's never really a sense that a character is completely evil or that a character is completely good. And so you want to really look at Lady Macbeth not like just a villain. You want to look at her as a fully formed character with her own personality, her own thoughts and dreams and personality traits, and maybe a character who lies to herself or wants to appear a certain way or whatever. You want to use these quotes to sort of analyze these characters as people, not really as roles. The role of the murderer, the role of the villain. That's really limiting. So enter Macbeth, my husband, and there's a sense that she's relieved to see him. He says, I have done the deed. Yeah, again, the deed. Again, he's avoiding using the word murder, just like she does. I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise? Did you hear something? She said, I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did you not speak? When? Now. As I descended meant as he was coming down. So presumably he might have been upstage if there was another level, or maybe he was on a different floor of the castle. So they're sort of like they're both, you can tell they're a little bit shaken, a little bit paranoid. They're talking about hearing noises. So did you hear something? No, I heard an owl. Did you not speak? When? Now? While I was coming down? Yes. Yes. Aye and nay are yes and no. Yeah, yes and no. Macbeth says, hark, listen. Who lies in the second chamber? Who sleeps in the next room, in the second room? Presumably the room next to the king's. Lady Macbeth says Donalbain, and of course Donalbain is the king's son. So Macbeth is sort of changing the subject here. This is on his mind, and we'll find out why in a second. He says, who sleeps in the room next to the king's? Lady Macbeth says, it's Donalbain. Macbeth says, this is a sorry sight, looking at his hands. Says here, he's saying, he's not talking about, so he asks who sleeps in the second room. Lady Macbeth answers him. He doesn't carry on with that. He's looking down at his hands, which would be covered with blood. He talks about that in a second. And he says, this is a sorry sight. Sorry is something that's pitiful. This is a pitiful sight. This makes him feel bad. And this is such a short, simple quote, but it really it's almost as if he's realizing what he's just done. It's almost as if it's really sinking in. This seems to be the sort of start of his guilt. Lady Macbeth tries to sort of rally him. She says, a foolish thought, a silly thought to say a sorry sight. That's just a silly thought. There's no point in saying that. Macbeth says, and then he goes back to the subject of the other room. He says, there's one did laugh in sleep, and one cried murder. They did wake each other. So here he never really names this character, and some people interpret this as him having hallucination, which is entirely possible because he has a few hallucinations throughout the story. But he did just ask about the second chamber. Our best guess is that he's talking about Malcolm and Donalbain, who would have been asleep in the room next to the king's. So one of them laughed in his sleep, and the other one was having a nightmare. So one of the king's sons had a nightmare and cried murder in his nightmare, and they both woke each other up. I stood and heard them, but they did say their prayers and addressed them again to sleep. So the king's sons had, one of the king's sons had a nightmare. They woke up and prayed, and as soon as they prayed together, they went back to sleep. Lady Macbeth says, there are two lodged together. Yes, they're sleeping in the same room. She sort of doesn't understand the point of what he's saying. She says, yes, they're asleep in the same room. Where are you going with this? And Macbeth continues, and he says, one cried, God bless us, and amen the other. So one of the brothers said, God bless us. And the other brother said, Amen, or the other person. As they had seen me with his hangman's hands. He's saying they prayed, and it's almost as if they saw him with his hangman's hands, like his hands are covered in blood. And he's saying the way they prayed made it feel almost as if they saw me. So again, this is where we start seeing his paranoia, his constant fear that someone knows. He's saying it's almost as if they saw me with my bloody hands, and that's why they prayed. So then he says, listening their fear, I could not say amen when they did say, God bless us. And he's saying, and when I was listening to them and how afraid they were, and they said, God bless us, I could not say amen. Amen is something that you would say to almost punctuate a prayer. And he's saying, I couldn't say amen. So he heard them pray, and it's almost as if he wanted to pray with them. Lady Macbeth says, consider it not so deeply. Don't think about it so deeply. She's starting to see what's happening with Macbeth, that he's overthinking things, and this is going to lead to his downfall, which is exactly what happens. So in a sense, her advice is good. She wants, throughout this sort of first half of the play, she's constantly telling him, don't think about it, yeah? It's a silly thought. Consider it not so deeply. She's always telling him, like, there's no point in overthinking this because it's not going to be good for us. But Macbeth can't help it, and he carries on with his story almost as if he doesn't hear her. He says, but wherefore could I not pronounce amen? Why couldn't I say amen? Yeah, wherefore could I not? Why couldn't I? I'll translate the whole line here. Why couldn't I say amen? And it's almost like he's mostly asking himself, not just her. But why could I not say amen? I had most need of blessing, and amen stuck in my throat. Really, really key quote here for Macbeth. Macbeth felt as though he really needed to pray. He needed blessing. Presumably God's forgiveness. But he was unable to pray. Yeah, amen. Stuck in my throat, as if the word amen was stuck in his throat. He couldn't get it out. He couldn't pray. And this is the point. So this is a really good way that Shakespeare shows us the point of no return for Macbeth. He's done something now that cannot be taken back. He has done something that he can't get forgiveness for. And this links really well. If you're writing about the divine right of kings, the idea that kingship in those times was associated with God. God would have chosen Duncan. And Macbeth murdering Duncan isn't just a crime against Scotland. It's not just a crime against a human being. It's a crime against God. It's something that sort of completely destroyed or severed his relationship with God. This is how Shakespeare shows us that by killing Duncan, Macbeth has done something he cannot take back. Something so heinous, something so hateful that God will not forgive him. By killing Duncan, Macbeth has forever lost his relationship with God. And in a society nowadays where it's a mostly secular society, and lots of people have different religious beliefs, and some people have no religious beliefs whatsoever, this quotation might lose a bit of its impact. But if you link this to context, if you link this to AO3, to a society that's very Christian, that's very religious, where everyone pretty much believes in God, in heaven and hell, in, the afterlife, and in the afterlife being spent sort of either rewarded for doing good things or punished for doing bad things, your relationship with God would be really important. And this sense of being cut off from God is something that must have been utterly devastating to Macbeth as a character, and also to the audience, the contemporary audience, the Elizabethan and Jacobean audience watching this. They would have been watching this section and really understood how Macbeth would feel. This idea that you've sinned so badly, that you've done something so bad that even God's turned his back on you, would have been really impactful. So this is a really good quotation to link with AO3, with your context, with the contemporary audience, how they would have felt, with the role, the importance of religion, the relationship with God, the divine right of kings. Excellent, excellent quote. And it's a really good quote to show us how Macbeth is feeling, because this sense that he's that he no longer has this relationship with God is something that you could really, it first of all really shows his guilt, but it's something that later on, when you start seeing his state of mind and how it sort of goes really bad really quickly, you can pinpoint it to this moment, this idea that he can never get over what he's done, because the forgiveness that he needs from God, he's never going to get. So this is a really important quotation to use. And we'll talk about another really important quotation about his state of mind in a second as well. So Lady Macbeth says to him, "These deeds, these acts, must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad if we think about these when you do something like this, like a murder, you can't think about it afterwards. You can't think about it like that. You can't think about it as having, as a sin, as something that God will never forgive you for, because it will drive us mad." And she brilliantly predicts exactly what's going to happen. And it's ironic as well, because it's also going to happen to her. So even though she's aware that thinking about these things will drive them to madness, and she's giving Macbeth this really solid advice, she doesn't escape the same fate as he does. It just takes longer to sort of affect her than it does to affect him. Macbeth says, and Macbeth, again, there's a sense, this whole scene, he never kind of addresses what she says. It's almost like he's talking to himself, almost like he's in some sort of trance. He says, methought is just I thought I heard a voice cry. Here, I'll add it. You can just break it down into me, thought, and then I thought. So he kind of repeats the story, and he adds to the story. He says, "I thought I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep.'" And of course, this is probably a hallucination, so yet another hallucination that he goes through. And he says, "I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep. The innocent sleep. Sleep that knits the ravelled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life. Sore labour's bath, balm of hurt minds. Great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast." And he's talking about the importance of sleep here. He's saying sleep is innocent, because if you think about it, when you're asleep as a human being, it's when you're at your most vulnerable, isn't it? It's when you're at your most weak and exposed. You're quite literally not aware of what's happening around you. So sleep is innocent. And he says, sleep knits the raveled sleeve of care. When you've been spending all day kind of doing things and breaking apart under all the cares and the worries that you have in your life, sleep knits you back together. Sleep kind of holds you together. He says sleep is a balm of hurt minds. When your mind hurts, when you're stressed, sleep calms you down. When sore labor, when you've been working really hard, sleep makes you feel better. So he's listing all these ways in which sleep is so important. Sleep is the point where you're at your most vulnerable, but it's such an important part of being alive, of feeling, of your well-being, basically. So here Macbeth talks about the importance of sleep, how sleep makes us vulnerable. It's almost like you're a child when you're asleep. You can literally not defend yourself. So how sleep makes us vulnerable and is a time of innocence, but also how sleep is the thing that keeps us healthy and well. It helps us deal with stress, helps us rest after hard work, etc. And he lists all these different things. Yes, sore labour's bath, balm of hurt minds, nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast. If life is a feast, the thing that feeds you the most is sleep. Of course, all of this is dramatic irony. Macbeth understands the importance of sleep, but from this point onwards, he will never be able to sleep again. And sleep is definitely an important motif in Macbeth. We have the witches talk about being making the sailor unable to sleep at the beginning. We have Macbeth talk about sleep quite a lot. The characters talk about sleep. Of course, Duncan is murdered in his sleep, which is very, very important. Insomnia is something that's going to affect both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth will sleepwalk at the end. So sleep is really important because of everything he's just listed. There's something almost like sacred about sleep. If nobody could trust that they could sleep in peace, nobody would survive. You literally can't live without sleep. And Macbeth has betrayed this kind of sacredness of sleep. He's not just betrayed Duncan as his king and as his cousin and as his relative or whatever. He's betrayed this sacredness of sleep that he's going to rely on. You know, Macbeth thought someone will need to sleep, but he's murdered someone in their sleep, and that's going to kind of affect him. And Lady Macbeth, and as it says that he's almost like ranting about sleep now. Lady Macbeth says, what do you mean? Like, she's just confused. What are you talking about now? Macbeth says, still it cried, sleep no more to all the house. And that cry that he heard, the voice that he heard say, sleep no more, Macbeth murder, sleep. It's almost like he heard it and it was so loud that he thought the whole house would hear it, the whole castle. Glamis hath murdered sleep. Yeah, Glamis has murdered sleep. And therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. And Macbeth shall sleep no more. Yeah, he calls himself by his three names. Thane, Lord of Glamis, Lord of Cawdor, Macbeth. Yeah, Glamis has murdered sleep. Therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. And he's absolutely spot on. He predicts exactly what's going to happen. More foreshadowing. He will not be able to sleep from here on out. Because he murdered sleep. He quite literally murdered the concept of being asleep, of being at rest, of being safe and innocent in sleep. He's taken that away. By taking that away from Duncan, he's taken that away from himself. Lady Macbeth says, who was it that thus cried? Who cried this? What are you talking about? She's trying to sort the difference between what's real and what's not, because he's kind of he's spilling all this stuff to her. Now she's struggling to kind of keep up with it and work out, right, okay, so hold on, was the people praying, was that real? The people saying sleep no more, was that real? Because of course she doesn't want to get caught. Who was it that cried this? Why, worthy Thane, you do unbend your noble strength to think so brain sickly of things. She's saying you're sort of unbending you're misusing your strength or taking away from your strength by thinking these brain sickly things. She feels like this is almost like a sign of weakness that he's thinking all these paranoid, guilty thoughts. She's saying it's a weakness. Well, Macbeth isn't being weak. Lady Macbeth thinks. She's saying that Macbeth is weak for doing this. And maybe she's just trying to motivate him to be strong. Maybe she's a bit frustrated. Again, that's up to your interpretation. Go get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hands. She commands him again. She kind of takes charge. She tells him, go get some water, wash the witness. Yeah, wash the proof of the murder from your hands. So wash the blood off your hands. And water, again, is going to be this recurring theme, this recurring idea, because washing in Macbeth is very much a metaphor for guilt. So she tells him to go wash the blood, the filthy witness of his hands. Why did you bring these daggers from the place? So as she's telling him to wash the blood of his hands, she realizes he's still holding the daggers. She said, but why did you bring the daggers? They must lie there. They should be in the room. Go carry them. Go take them back to the room and smear the sleepy grooms with blood. She's saying, well, you should have brought the daggers back. They were meant to stay there. That's the whole point of planting the murder weapons on the guards. Go back and smear the blood on the guards and plant the daggers on them. Macbeth says, I'll go no more. And here he's completely determined. I'm not going back. I'm afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again. I dare not. He says, I can't even think about what I've done, let alone look at what I've done. I will not be going back. Lady Macbeth says, infirm of purpose. Here, there's definitely a sense of frustration here. Infirm of purpose means, like, if you're in an infirm, it's like you have a disability of some kind. So it's almost like his purpose, his willpower has been disabled. He's not using his willpower properly. Infirm of purpose, she's insulting him. She's planned this really carefully, and she's frustrated that he's not going along with the plan, and now he doesn't have the willpower to go back just because he did something so heinous. She says, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead arbiter's pictures. And this is a typical sort of Lady Macbeth, like very flippant, very kind of bold thing to say. Of course, we'll find out much, much later on that this is not the case. She says the sleeping and the dead arbiter's pictures. Someone who's asleep and someone who's dead looks exactly the same. That's not the case at all. And we'll find that out later. We'll find out how it is very different. But she's projecting this strength and this sort of boldness, maybe to make herself feel bolder, or maybe because she doesn't understand the reality of seeing a dead body. Macbeth is a soldier. He's seen a lot of dead bodies. She hasn't. And we'll see how it affects her. Seeing Duncan's dead body will definitely affect her. We just don't find out until much later on. So the sleeping and the dead arbiter's pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. Only a child would be afraid of a picture of the devil. She's saying like it's just like an image. It's just something you're looking at. Only a child would be afraid to look at a picture of the devil, right? Oh, she's almost calling him like a child for being afraid. She says, if he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt. She's saying, if he has bled, if there's blood on the crime scene, I'll just use it to paint the faces of the guards so that it looks like they're guilty. So she's going to go through with the plan. She takes the daggers, she's going to plant the daggers and put the smear blood on the guards' faces so that it looks like they did it. Exit. She leaves. Knocking within. Now, the knocking is, so you'd be hearing the knocking sound from off stage. And the knocking could be just people starting to wake up. We know that it's Macduff that wakes the king up. So maybe Macduff, Lennox, all the lords that are sort of waking up are starting to... So you'd have one person to wake up and then knock on the doors of the other characters to wake them up as well. So the knocking indicates to us that people are starting to wake up. Macbeth says, Macbeth is now alone. Whence is that knocking? Where's the knocking coming from? Again, that kind of tone of paranoia. He says, how is it with me when every noise appalls me? And so it startled him to hear the knocking noise. And he's like, what's wrong with me that literally any single noise startles me so much? Then he looks at his hands and he says, what hands are here? He's almost questioning, like, whose hands are these? What have I done? Ha, they pluck at mine eyes. To look at his hands feels like it rips out his own eyes. He's implying that the sight of his hands, reminding him of Duncan's murder, is a painful sight. And of course that links to his guilt. And then he's talking about washing his hands, and he says, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? Neptune would be the god of the sea, god of the seas. So will all great, in Greek mythology, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. He's saying, if I had all of the god of the ocean, the god of the seas, if I used all of the ocean, the entire sea, to wash my hands, would it be enough to wash the blood off my hands? He says, no, it wouldn't. Instead, my hands would turn all of the oceans red with blood, making them go from green to red. He feels like what he's done is so enormous, so unthinkable, so horrific, that even if he used all of the oceans in the world to wash his hands would turn the oceans red with blood. He's saying that if he used so this image or metaphor shows us the enormity of what Macbeth has done and how aware he is of the burden of guilt he now carries. He knows that in a sense, this blood, no matter whether he washes it physically or not, the blood will always be on his hands. The guilt will never go away. The blood, Duncan's blood, will always be on his hands. His guilt will never go away. And that's correct. It doesn't really go away. Re-enter Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth comes back and she says, my hands are of your colour. Yeah, my hands are the same colour as yours now. I also have blood on my hands. But I shame to wear a heart so white. Yeah, the color white is usually associated with innocence. It has connotations of purity and goodness. So she's saying, I'm ashamed to wear a heart so white. My hands are the same color as yours. They're also covered in blood. But I'd be embarrassed to feel the way you feel right now, this kind of naive guilt that you're feeling. Again, we'll find out later that this is very much not the case. She might be saying this in the moment. She might be lying. She might believe it right now. but her heart is, in a way, white, just like his. She isn't this kind of completely cold-hearted evil creature that she presents herself to be. We hear the knocking again, so more people probably waking up. I hear a knocking at the south entry, so someone at the south gate. Retire we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed. She hears the knocking. She said, right, people are at the door. Let's go back to our bedroom. A little water clears us of this deed. All we need is a little bit of water. She doesn't say a little water will wash the blood away. She says it will clear us of the deed. Once our hands are clean, we won't even think about what we've done. This directly contradicts what Macbeth says about never being able to wash the blood off his hands and show Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's contrasting attitudes towards Duncan's murder. A little water clears us of this deed. How easy is it then? Then it'll be fine, then it'll be easy. Your constancy hath left you unattended. She's basically saying, if we wash our hands, it will make the deed go away. And she says, then it'll be easy, then we'll be able to cope with it. And when she says your constancy hath left you unattended, she's saying your constancy is like your willpower, your strength, your sense of purpose has left you unattended, has abandoned you. Yeah, you've lost your sense of willpower, your sense of courage. Because it must be frustrating for her. She is, married to a soldier, a guy who commands armies, so she probably didn't expect this much guilt from him. But again, the fact that he is feeling guilty in spite of what he does for a living shows us how horrible, how heinous this betrayal and this particular murder is. The problem with Macbeth isn't killing. The problem is killing Duncan. Again, the knocking sound. Hark! More knocking. Get on your nightgown, lest occasion call us and show us to be watchers. We better put on our night clothes in case we get caught. Like if someone finds us or if someone comes to find us, it can't look like we've been awake throughout the night. It can't look like we've been up and about in the castle. Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts. And here she's kind of suggesting that while she's been talking, Macbeth kind of has been lost in his thoughts, which is understandable. He's just obsessed with this idea of what he's done and kind of processing the guilt and the shame of it all. So don't be so lost in your thoughts. Macbeth says, to know my deed, 'twere best not to know myself. And this is a really, really quite a heartbreaking quote. He's saying, to know what I've done, I'd rather not even know myself. Okay, again, this symbolizes the point of no return Macbeth has just reached. Now that he has murdered he can never be the same person again. And in fact, this quote does indicate the beginning of his change. From this point onwards, Macbeth will begin to change as a character. And this is the start of him eventually. This is what leads him to eventually become the tyrant that he ends up being. But he recognizes this. He can never, he'd rather not know himself. There's almost like he wants to separate himself from, this action has separated him from the person that he used to be, the good, loyal, brave Macbeth, the noble Macbeth that we met at the beginning. He can't even know this person anymore. It's almost like he needs to be someone new to be able to cope with what he's done. Again, the knocking sound, knocking within. Wake, Duncan, with thy knocking. I would thou couldst. He's saying the knocking, he's talking to the knocking, he's saying, are you going to wake Duncan with this knocking? I wish that you would. So this is definitely him regretting the murder. He wishes the knocking could wake Duncan up. This shows us how much he already regrets what he has done. He wishes Duncan was still alive. And then they both leave, presumably to go to their bedrooms, get into the nightgowns, get into bed, pretend like they were asleep the whole night. And this is the end of Act 2, Scene 2, a really, really important scene, quite an impactful scene because it really shows us, it's a really good scene to show us the contrast between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth at the beginning, the way they handle the situation very differently. And of course, it's the point of no return. From here onwards, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth can never take back what they've done. They can't change their mind. They can only move forward. And how they cope with what happens next is going to sort of very much form their path. Their relationship will begin to change after this as well. Their relationship to other characters will change as a result. This is going to change everything. And Macbeth very much has a sense of this, whereas Lady Macbeth, she's very sort of practical with everything. She's just about on to the next thing. Right, the daggers, get them there. You know, pin the murder on the guards. Let's get ourselves into bed so that we can pretend we've been asleep all night. She's very sort of focused on the plan, getting things done, almost like as a way to distract herself. Whereas Macbeth can't. Like, he's stuck on this idea. He knows he's cut off his connection to God. He knows he's done something he can never take back. He already wishes he could take it back. Doesn't mean that Lady Macbeth doesn't feel guilt. We just can't see it yet. We will definitely see it later on. So lots of important key themes, lots of important key quotations. I hope that this was helpful. As usual, if you have any questions, be it about this scene, this act, the play as a whole, plot, characters, assessment objectives, how to respond to a specific exam question, anything at all, drop your question in the comments and we'll do our best to help. I hope to see you all in the next video.